Hello Internet and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Now unfortunately this video is already over about 2 weeks late, and I have a lot of stuff going on in my personal life and I've just been very busy. So normally in this show I would take 2 or 3 passes at the script and then touch up some sections that were, maybe a little problematic or a little rambly and cut them down into something more manageable. However, this week I really don't have time for any of that. I need to finish this so I can start the next episode in this series basically immediately. So this is very much a rough draft first pass script. And unfortunately, that means that some of it is going to be a little bit lower quality than what it usually is. Particularly, I talk about civilians in this episode, which that should have been rewritten probably. And then the big spoilery thing at the end of the video is kind of like I wrote it in my initial testing, expecting to go back and refine it with more testing, and I just don't have time. So that section in particular is probably pretty bad. Now, all of that said, this is going to be a very long video, so, settle in and forgive me for my shortcomings. But anyway, let's get started here. First up today is a bunch of quick stuff. So first we have from Bombastic Slacks, there is now a pop-up warning for when the player is being suffocated. Now this just makes the mechanic a little bit more visible, and I believe you can disable it in the pop-up distractions manager thingy if you hate seeing it, so simple, good change, easy. Next up from Random Typer, labs will now spawn fish samples. That's a very simple change. Probably most of you won't even care about this. Fish might be the absolute least used mutation category in the entire game. People just don't want to be fish, apparently. But yeah, you can now find those samples, so hooray. And keeping things rolling, next up today from Standing Storm, we've got the addition of a synagogue. I don't really have much to say here. I didn't even really look at the files or anything. I just figured I would shout it out. Most of our in-game religious locations are pretty ambiguous in that they spawn like completely random religious books and materials. Or I think that's how it is. I guess it's been a while since I bothered going to any of them in the game. But anyway, this one is specifically themed as a synagogue, so there you go, I guess. Moving on though, next up today from White Cloud 0123, we've got another pop-up, and this one is to alert the player when they will be very likely to hit a friendly creature when they're using a reach attack. Right, so if an NPC or a pet or a tamed animal or whatever is between you and an enemy, you might accidentally hit them with your spear when you make a reach attack. Well, it actually might be guaranteed. I'm not sure if you have a 100% chance to hit a friendly creature in between. I'm not really sure how that works. But really, regardless, there's now a pop-up that will alert you when you find yourself in that position, and yeah, it's another simple change that probably will help out some new players. Next up from Guardian DLL, we've got the Sky Island mod being added as an in-repo mod. This means that it will now be included with the game, and so more people will see it and play it, presumably. It also means that people in the project will be tasked with keeping it up to date and resolving any issues with it. Now, I've never played using this mod. I'm not a fan of mods in general, but someone told me this is basically Tarkov, and I definitely recently picked up Tarkov again, so yeah, I probably should try this at some point. And I know a lot of people have been talking about this, and people seem to really like it, so the more this is going to give it more exposure by making it distributed with the game. So yeah, I just don't really have much to say here. I just want to let you know it seems like a pretty popular mod, so there you go. Next up from Random Typer, we've got a change to NPCs that you find in Migo Towers. Now, I've seen a lot of people complain that rescuing the NPCs in the tower for some reason does not make them trust you. This means that even though you went through probably a ton of work to save them from that tower, they just ignored you, and therefore you couldn't recruit them without doing a bunch more work. Well, this PR should resolve that, making it so that rescuing the NPCs makes them trust you a lot more. And again, I don't have much to say here, it's just something I've seen people talk about and figured I would let you know. Moving along, next up, also from Random Typer, we've got an adjustment to the range of SMGs and similar pistol caliber weapons. Why was that was a hard sentence to read for some reason. Now look, I'm not a gun guy, I have no idea about guns, okay, so don't yell at me for my opinions. I have no real firm opinion. You can argue amongst yourselves. My only real experience is, as I said, I play Tarkov. That's about all I know about guns. So don't fight me, I'm just telling you what changed here. I have no firm opinion on this. Anyway, this PR changed those SMGs to have just shorter ranges in general. I looked at the files and it looks like this is a flat out nerf in ranges across the board. I didn't see any that got buffed in any way or kept the same. The range reduction is also quite significant. This is not a drop of just 1 or 2 tiles. For example, the H&K USC 45 carbine went from range 20 to range 6, and this is a pretty significant reduction. Anyway, like I said, I'm not a gun guy. I do not know here. In my mind, this reduction is because of our limited engagement ranges in Cataclysm, so I think it sounds worse than it actually is, but I also don't really want to argue with anyone about it. I do not care, so you can fight amongst yourselves if you are so inclined to do so. Next up today from Ashclaw, we've got the addition of a solar farm. Now, people have been asking to add solar farms to the game for literally as long as I can remember. They do exist in New England, and of course, most of us players love our solar panels, so it seems like a pretty great thing overall. Now, Ash did say that this was their first attempt ever at making map gen, and it's definitely a little it's a little basic and square, but there's nothing wrong with it at all. It's totally fine the way it is. However, it is not as cool as Helios 1. Sorry. Shout out to my New Vegas homies, by the way. Anyway, yeah, this is a good little change. Obviously, a great place to grab some panels. And yeah, people have asked for this for a long time. And I think for your first map gen, I would not worry about the quality or anything. I would just focus on the fact that people will be happy to see this. Next up from A Noob in Disguise, we've got a change to the ADS Bionic, which I think is the active defense system. I didn't actually look this up. I think in the original Deus Ex, it was called that, and it was it would just cause rockets to explode with a force field around you instead of hitting you. Man, I should replay the original Deus Ex. I should, all of you, by the way. That's one of the greatest games of all time, and nobody talks about it anymore. Anyway, this Bionic previously reduced damage by a flat percentage and applied to the core damage types. However, now it will provide variable protection based on the type of damage. So instead of blocking 50% of blunt damage, it will instead have 1 to 4 bash protection. Now, I did see a lot of people complaining about this, saying that the Bionic is now worthless, which I disagree. Now, it was previously insanely overpowered, and now it's still very good. Its extra protection value at the flip of a switch, and I understand its power draw was increased significantly in this PR, but it's still a very good Bionic. Now, I can't argue that it's not a nerf because, yes, obviously this is a huge nerf to the Bionic, but it was also previously ridiculous nonsense, and now it's still just pretty good. And if you don't want to use it, then don't use it, but I think this PR is pretty good. Moving on, next up today from Rannick Ortega, we've got some dog mutants. Now, these are called the Thrasher, the Mauler, and the Loper. The Thrasher is probably the main one to note here because it can dig, which is a bit unusual for a dog creature. This will do the whole worm thing of having dirt piles churned up as it moves around. I don't really care for that personally because that means they're not visible until you get close to them, and it makes it really easy to accidentally bump into them, things like that. Now, the Loper has a leap attack, and the Mauler, honestly, it looks pretty basic. I don't know, it has a bite attack, I guess. But anyway, there's nothing exceptional about these enemies. They're not broken and overpowered or ultra dangerous or anything that you really have to be aware of. And in fact, my favorite thing about them is that they are not hostile by default, which I think was a great choice. You can tame them using dog food the way you would tame other dogs, and I'm just happy to see more mutants that are passive. In my opinion, we have a lot of mutants that are hostile for no obvious reason. I don't believe being mutated should make you instantly hostile to the player. I don't like that. So anyway, you're going to start seeing these mutant puppers around as you play the game. They can be tamed, they can produce baby versions of themselves, and yeah, there's a few more weird pets for you to add to your collection, I guess. I like this change, so, moving on. Next up today from A Noob in Disguise, we've got a split for Kevlar, making it 2 separate types. There's now ballistic and stab Kevlar, and I have absolutely no idea how Kevlar works really or details about it, so I'm just going to be basically reading the PR here. Layered Kevlar is now ballistic Kevlar, and the panels can no longer be crafted, they can only be salvaged from armor. Repairs are done with new panels, since if it gets hit, it basically needs to be replaced. And the Kevlar vests were converted to use this new form of Kevlar. The protection values for non-ballistic damage were significantly reduced, and this will have an effect on things like thrown rocks from ferals, which are bash damage, I believe, last I checked. Now, standard Kevlar is now being treated as the anti-stab type of Kevlar, like you would find in a dog bite suit. Now, this is the kind of Kevlar you will find on most everything that is not a ballistic vest of some sort. The main protection value on this type of Kevlar is the stab protection, and it provides very little bash or ballistic protection. Okay, so that was basically just me reading the summary of this PR. I have absolutely no knowledge of how Kevlar works, and I don't have opinions on whether this is good or bad. It kind of makes sense to me that there would be two types of Kevlar, but also like, I really don't care. I'm sure most of you will have way more coherent opinions than I do on this. So you can take all that as you will. I have no idea what sort of impact this will have in terms of a player's experience, and I have no opinions on whether it tracks with real-world information. And really, the only thing I think about this is that I really don't like that I have to track two different types of Kevlar. That's about my only opinion. And with that very pitiful assessment, we're just going to move on to the next change. Next up today, we have to talk about these panicked person style, like, I don't want to use the word NPCs. People have been calling them civilians. And I hope you're up for a good rant because I've got some thoughts on these creatures. And yeah, I haven't talked about them yet, but I really don't care for them very much. So anyway, this PR is from NetSysFire, and it adds two of those new type of civilians. Now, we never talked about the initial PR that added civilians. I apparently missed it somewhere along the way here. But these are non-NPCs that run around and are insta-killed by zombies, and in my opinion are pointless. Now, you've probably at least seen a few panicked persons around, and again, they call these things civilians. Now, this PR adds two more of these creatures, a parent and a hospitalized civilian. The hospitalized type is immobile and literally does nothing, the implication from its description and whatnot being that they were on medical support prior to the apocalypse and have been left behind to rot. And while that kind of sounds interesting, the fact that they literally just lay there and do absolutely nothing and provide no benefit to the game whatsoever, I don't really care for that too much. Now, the parents are running around looking for their kids. They didn't evacuate because they wouldn't leave without their children. So basically their dialogue is just, oh no, Timmy, where did you go? And etc, etc. So my rambling is not really about this PR. I think this PR is fine. I think it just furthers the issues that I see with civilians in the game. These are not treated as NPCs, they cannot be recruited, and they do not get the perks of being an NPC, like stats and skills and body parts and etc. These are treated as monsters, so basically all they can do is move around, and given how they've been set up, they really can't do anything other than instantly die. They literally, I've never seen them kill anything, they just always die. Now, my issue with them is that they are not NPCs. I really don't like this. If we're going to add NPC type characters to the game, they should, be treated as NPCs and not handled as monsters. Now, I understand there may be some resource issues with having a shitload of NPCs running around, but if they're supposed to be people, then they should be people. They should have proper dialogue trees, some of them should be recruitable, they should get the benefits of randomized skills and traits that would make them better or worse when facing off against zombies. Instead, they are all identical monsters with identical dialogues that are ineffective at doing literally anything other than dying right in front of you. And when I first encountered panicked persons, I thought, okay, ha ha ha, they ran out and they got killed, whatever. There was a sort of novelty to it. But the more I thought about this, the more it annoyed me, and I think this was a poor choice to implement them this way. It is already very difficult to find recruitable NPCs as the player. Very few static NPCs can be recruited. For example, if you go to the refugee center, almost like none of those characters can be recruited. Very few of them actually can. And most random NPCs that you find while you're playing the game are hostile. The vast majority of them are bandits or thugs that you find out in the world. These also cannot be recruited, so recruiting a bunch of NPCs to put together a faction camp is pretty difficult, or at least requires a good bit of effort on the player's part to find and recruit more people. And these new civilians exist as neither random or static NPCs and are instead just monsters, so they can't be recruited. And in the future, I foresee someone bringing this up and saying, oh, we should have more recruitable NPCs. Where are all the normal people? Why aren't there more normal people in the Cataclysm? And people will point out these civilians and say, oh, well, we already have so many of these people. Most people are like this, mindless, they're getting slaughtered, blah, blah, blah. And then we won't get more NPCs, and I'll be annoyed by it, and the game will continue sliding towards civilian instead of NPC additions. So that's my first problem with these creatures. My second main issue is that they just really flat out don't make a lot of sense to me. Explain to me why a person who is looking for their kid cannot be recruited and cannot function as a human being. If I waited a long enough time, they would eventually calm down and I would be able to reason with them. It's really dumb to suggest that these people literally just wander around until they're murdered. People told me that they are treated this way because they are are feral, they are incoherent, they're not really people anymore, the blob psychosis has made them non-functional. And my response to that is, okay, cool, so if they're feral, then they shouldn't be hostile to zombies. And then people say, oh no, well, they're not that feral, they're not so feral that they're actually mindless, like, zombie allies. To which I say, cool, then they should be NPCs, and some of them should be recruitable because they're still functionally human. And they say, oh no, but they're too feral for that, and we just go in a circle, in a circle, in a circle. Also, for the record, using this PR as an example, there is no mention of them being feral in their description or in their dialogue. Why is it that every person that was left in a hospital setting was too feral to have dialogue or too broken to interact with? They're all broken. They're unable to communicate. That's all kind of a load of crap as far as I can tell. Why can't this literally just be an NPC with random gear and stats that's looking for their kid? Why are we making them monsters? Anyway, I have a problem with all of that, and I'm looking at several paragraphs of only partially coherent rambling, so I'm going to cut things off here. I just, summarize, I really dislike these civilian creatures. I actually really dislike them. I think it's bad for the game because I'm worried it's going to discourage people from balancing the game around actual NPCs that can have value in the game. I also do not think they make sense as a baseline. A panicked person is apparently permanently disabled due to psychosis, but they're not psychosis-y enough to be treated as a feral. And explain to me why I should feel guilty for killing a sort of feral person, but not guilty killing a little bit more feral person. That doesn't make any sense. I'm supposed to feel guilty over killing the overconfident officer when 100% it will fully shoot you in the face if you get between it and an enemy. So I just don't like these creatures. Why is killing a feral not cause guilt, but killing a panicked person who's already apparently feral enough that they're not human anymore, I feel guilt over that? It doesn't make sense to me. I dislike them top to bottom. I'm sad to see them being expanded. Maybe I'm being too harsh here. Again, by the way, this is the first draft. I should have edited this throughout the week, but I didn't have time. So I would have reined it in a little bit, but I didn't have time to do that. But really, regardless, that rant is over. I don't like these creatures. I just don't think that I don't think it should have been put in this way. And the fact that they're being expanded means it's just going to continue expanding, and no one is thinking about the actual implications of maybe we should be balancing the game around actual NPC characters and not just making monsters and calling them pseudo NPCs. I don't care for that. Next up from Fairy Armadillo, we've got some stuff for cockroaches, which I'm just going to read this here. Okay, quote, cockroaches flee light, they hide under furniture, they eat corpses, and they breed faster when fed, which is, yep, it's Roach stuff for sure. So I like this PR, if for no other reason than because they laid everything out in bullet points, which makes my job a whole lot easier. So let's just read this together, shall we? There's a new monster attack called Eat Carrion, which allows monsters to chew on corpses. And when they do this, damage is dealt to the corpse, and of course, if it's fully damaged, the corpse will be destroyed. Now this is tracked using the monster's stomach, and roaches are currently the only thing that work this way, and their stomach size is 1. So basically, anytime they eat something or nibble on a corpse, their stomach will go from 0 to 1, and then they are full until the following day. So you're not going to see a single roach eat a full human corpse right in front of you. That's not going to happen. Now creatures do not need to eat in order to stay alive. They will continue living, even if they, don't find anything to eat, and currently the only thing that eating does is make them slightly more likely to breed offspring. So you might be thinking about the implications of this in the future for livestock in the game. Now we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but the current state of this you could easily apply this to any animal that you tame. You could feed them and they could eat regularly, but if they were left unattended or undiscovered by the player, they wouldn't just starve to death. And keeping them fed would mean that they reproduce more frequently, or we could maybe tie this to their food production. So maybe chickens lay eggs more when they're not hungry, or cows produce more milk when they're fed, and etc. Other things in this PR include 3 new flags, which were Bright Light, Small Hider, and Cornered Fighter. Now, Bright Light basically makes it so roaches are afraid of bright lights. It's sort of stereotypical, right? You flip on the lights and all the roaches run off thing that you would see in movies or whatever. Small Hider means that they can hide under certain furniture items if that furniture item has a flag to allow for this hiding. So you're going to see roaches under the couch and etc. Now, all roaches have this. I do think that it's it's a bit of a mistake here. The giant cockroach is like 33 kilos, so it's like 70 pounds, but it's described as the size of a dog, so I really don't feel like it should be hiding under very much furniture. The only roach that doesn't have this, according to the PR, is the pregnant cockroach, but that's like the exact same size as a giant cockroach, so why would one have it and the other wouldn't? Like the PR suggests, like, oh, it's too big because it's pregnant, but like I said, they're the same size, so I do think this should be looked at and fixed here. But anyway, the final flag was cornered fighter, and this just means that if you back them into a corner, they're gonna fight you. Previously, they would just run and run and run, but now they will actually start to fight you if they have nowhere to go. But anyway, that's, it's a whole bunch of roach-related stuff. I think it makes them more interesting in general, and it does add some cool stuff here. I like the idea of them slowly eating corpses, and I like the idea of maybe livestock having some form of hunger in the future, but right now it's pretty limited to roaches. So yeah, it's sort of a weird PR. I didn't know I needed cool roach stuff in my life, but apparently I did, so I actually really like this. Moving on, next up today from Carol, we've got the obsolation of various robots. Now this would be the iBot, the police bot, and the riot bot. And yes, look, I know some people love these things, but they just didn't make sense in our setting. So although I know you love your free robot parts, they just didn't fit the game, and it made sense for them to be removed. It's also worth mentioning that these will continue existing in the Aftershock mod, where like random robots make way more sense in Aftershock. But anyway, yeah, despite the fact that I think this will be a bit of a contentious change, I do think it's overall pretty good. And I don't really have a lot to say about it other than I think it makes sense with our current lore. There were many things that have existed for as long as I have played the game, but the game evolved over the last like 6 years, and they just don't really fit anymore. So I'm happy to see them leave. Next up today from A Noob in Disguise, we've got Bionic Prerequisites. Now this made it so that certain Bionics could not be installed unless the player already had like a prerequisite Bionic installed. So for example, you cannot install the hydraulic muscle CBM unless you first installed the titanium skeletal bracing. Now the reason being here that having hydraulic muscles would literally just rip your body apart unless you had the other CBM that makes you able to resist that. And from what I saw in this PR, that is the only Bionic that currently has a prerequisite, although that was, I wrote this script like 2 weeks ago, so it might have changed since then. And it is pretty much that straightforward. It added the infrastructure for some Bionics to require other Bionics first, and it added a requirement to the hydraulic muscle CBM, and that's all this PR did. However, it does have implications for the future, so let's talk about that. So at first I thought this would be just a flat out good thing, because there are some Bionics that do indeed make sense to require previous installations, and it does open up the door for additional Bionics. For example, maybe you want to get the alloy plating CBMs, but Rubik will have to first install some kind of prerequisite like skin mesh to allow for this or something like that. Like maybe it's just a really simple Bionic it's always available from Rubik. Maybe it adds like a +1 to protection values or something as a predecessor to getting the alloy platings. So initially I thought we could add stuff like that. I thought this would be pretty cool, and it opened up the door to maybe coming up with some new, Bionic additions. However, the more I thought about it, I do have some concerns over this addition. Because the game is heavily based around finding randomized loot, it is hard to guarantee that the player would get the lower tier Bionic before they get the higher tier Bionic. Unless we guarantee that Rubik has all of the baseline CBMs, this opens the door to you finding something really, really good and then literally never getting to use it. And this is ultimately a pretty feels bad moment for the player. If we give the player cool stuff, we should enable them to use that stuff. So in the example of this PR, let's say, maybe Rubik never has that skeletal bracing CBR and you find the hydraulic muscle CBM, you might literally never get to use it, and that would kind of suck. And we can ultimately guarantee this by making Rubik spawn those prerequisite Bionics with 100% certainty, but I don't know if they're going to do that. I don't know if anyone's going to make that happen. So is this PR bad? I saw some people saying it was bad, but no, I think it's good. It adds some cool new functionality, and it opens the door to more low-tier prerequisite Bionics. They could be added to have less value, but could also be guaranteed spawns like the alloy plating and skin mesh that I just suggested earlier. And of course, that's just a thought. I have no idea if that's actually a good idea or not. However, it could potentially cause issues in the future. If they lock a bunch of CBMs behind other CBMs, that could really be bad. If it's handled incorrectly, this could lead to a lot of unpleasant, unfortunate disappointment for the player. And since this is an open source project, there's no guarantee that everyone will handle this correctly. Someone could make ridiculous requirements and completely screw everything up. However, all that said, I personally think the PR is good. The only restricted bionic currently is the hydraulic muscles. However, I have some background concern of being locked out of CBMs, and I believe Rubik should spawn the prerequisites 100% of the time. And as I said, I'm a little worried how this is going to be handled in the future, so it's a little bit of a mixed bag from me, I guess. However, I don't think this is overtly bad, and I think that people who are mad about this, you should wait and see how things shake out. Anyway, since we are talking about CBMs, there were 2 PRs from A Noob in Disguise that added new ones. One of them was just after the cutoff for this video, but we might as well talk about them together. So the first one that was added was a Bionic stun gun, and this is pretty straightforward. It's exactly what you would expect. It's a stun gun in a CBM form. It's a melee attack. It deals 15 electric damage and costs 5 kg, is it just joules, kilojoules? 5 kilojoules to use. Now it takes 25 moves to execute, and there doesn't seem to be any cooldown, so you can just spam this as much as you want as long as you have power. And it can't really compete with like a decked out survivor or someone using a later game melee weapon or anything, but it does seem pretty good for a low level character. And I really don't have much to say or explain about that. It's just a stun gun, but it's in your body instead of something you hold in your hand. Now the other PR added Bionic lungs, which I do find this a lot more interesting. Even just as a concept, this is, I think, the first full organ replacement CBM, or because is the digestive system CBM, is that a full replacement? It might be, I don't know. Well, whatever, you know what I mean. It's one of the first big full-on organ changes, which that on its own is pretty cool, and it enables people who want to roleplay the transhumanism type character, like I'm ascending beyond humanity, I'm replacing my body with robot parts, etc. Anyway, this lung CBM is called the Synthetic Lungs CBM, and once installed, it cannot be removed. Now, we talked about that previously, making certain CBMs critical to the player functionality once they're installed, and once installed, your cardio will be nearly at maximum. It's possible for a regular player to make their cardio slightly higher than the CBM would if you min-maxed your traits and stuff like that, but let's be honest, most of us we don't pay that much attention to cardio. So the CBM for most of us will have a noticeable boost to our cardio. It also does lower your health stats balance point very slightly in the negative. However, this does not affect your cardio in any way. It would only affect your regen and disease checks, and having a minus 20 balance point as opposed to 0 is really not that significant. And you can of course ignore this if you install the leukocyte CBM. Now the main concern here is that it does require power draw, so if you deplete your bionic power, your character will suddenly not be able to use these bionic lungs, which, spoiler alert, is bad for your character. This will reduce your stamina, and though it will not outright kill you, it does make it basically impossible to participate in combat or flee from enemies, so you will still just die from this. And this is a pretty hefty downside. If you don't pay attention to your bionic power and have no means to quickly replenish it, it absolutely could kill you. However, this doesn't seem all that likely, really. Most of us, we almost never fully deplete our reserves very often. Even if this is ticking down your power in the background, I don't think it'll be a problem. And then finally, I was talking to A Noob in Disguise about all of this to pin down the details, and I offhandedly made the joke that Rubik should hand you a little bloody paper bag that contains your old lungs after you install it. Now, I was just being stupid, but they were like, yeah, actually we could do that, which I think is awesome. And I sort of love that. It doesn't really affect gameplay or anything, but I think it would be the first opportunity in the game for self-cannibalism, which I love. I don't know, I'm weird, whatever. Anyway, there are some new CBMs. There you go. I know people in general, we're always very happy when we see new Bionics, so I think people will be thrilled to see this. Neither of them have any prerequisites for installation, at least that I know, so yeah, you can slap them in whenever you want. I'm always happy to see new Bionics come to the game, and I think the lungs were just a really cool, like, full organ replacement is great. I love that. Next up today from Cheechit 1044, we've got a unique one-time dungeon event. Now I'm going to talk about this without being too spoilery, just because it is pretty, like, it's unique. It's one per game, and it's new, and you can only do it once per character. So basically, it all starts with you finding a location in the game called a quiet farm. Now this location will begin the encounter, and yeah, I know this is like a show where we talk about changes, but I would really rather let you figure this out on your own. I might make a separate video giving a brief walkthrough, but it's still in development, so maybe that should wait. And honestly, probably not. It's not going to happen. My just life has been too hectic lately. Now, what I will say is that I died in the process of trying to figure out this location. Now, I did speak to the creator about this, and the consequences for / instructions on what to do probably are going to change in the near future. I personally would recommend save scumming this. If you die, I would save before you go in the location. Now, in the PR, it says that death should be very unlikely, but I did die on my test character due to not really knowing what I was supposed to do I think I was like at the end, and I just didn't know what the last step. And since you might be doing this on a character that you've invested like 100 hours into, yeah, I would not be mad at you for save scumming. I would understand that. Other than that, I think this is a super unique thing, and I actually really like the vibe of it quite a lot. The furniture and terrain within the location give a nice atmosphere, and I just knee-jerk really like it a lot. Like, it's great. I like it. But then again, I'm a man who is rapidly approaching middle age, but I'm still emo AF, so like your mileage may vary. Okay, so finally today we do need to talk about the Blob Lieutenant. Now, I did actually make time to rewrite and re-record this section. Believe me, it was initially like a 16-minute rant, and I've trimmed it down considerably, so let's all just be happy about that. Trust me, this is better. However, this is just as spoilery as it sounds, so if you don't want spoilers, you need to bail on the video now. Alright, so first of all, I want to be very clear, this is a work in progress in its current form. I have a lot of issues with the way this looks currently, but it will be refined and dialed in as things move forward. I do understand frustration or anger about this. Currently, it's pretty rough, but, let's talk about it. So first of all, this PR is from Rennick CDDA, and it adds the first Blob Lieutenant to the game. Now you can think of this more or less how it sounds. Most zombies are like blunt instruments, foot soldiers, whatever, that convert a lot of humans into more biomass for the old zombie horde. But the lieutenant is more like I don't know, a specialist, a supervisor, whatever analogy you want to use. I'm not really sure about the lore and why exactly they're so much better, but, it doesn't particularly matter at this stage of development, so, whatever. So anyway, let's talk basics. This creature is photophobic. It does not like the light, and I believe it outright dies when it's exposed to proper sunlight. It is supposed to appear only at night and only when you're moving through a field or a forest, but I did see at least one person report finding it in the city. Now, it's not clear to me if they were moving through a field in the city, maybe that's why it spawned, or if their mega city run broke the spawning of this creature, or if there's just an issue with how the lieutenant spawns currently. Now, the creature is designed to stay out of line of sight from the player, so it will, it wants to remain at the edge of like flashlight range, and ideally it will never be spotted by you. Now, once it's active, it will spawn a lot of amalgamations, it will destroy terrain around the player, and it will upgrade nearby enemies. In terms of stats, for the Lieutenant, it has 25 armor in every category and 500 ballistic armor. Now, I really hate this. It's super gamey to make it bulletproof like this. There's no explanation for why it's bulletproof, and it's still an organic creature, and I hate that you decided, the player doesn't get to shoot this. I hate that idea in general. It has a speed of 200, which makes it pretty effective at keeping out of range of the player. It has a dodge skill of 10, which I also find to be kind of bullshit. Its HP is 250, and it regens 5 HP per turn. Now, all of this adds up to be a very annoying enemy to kill, which in conjunction with the spawning of amalgamations makes this enemy extremely obnoxious, in my opinion, and we'll talk about the amalgamations here in a second. It's not designed to deal direct damage to the player, and so it poses no real threat to you in melee. It's clearly designed to spawn lots of enemies and be very annoying to kill. Now let's talk about the amalgamations, I guess. The Shadow, which is what this lieutenant is called, will spawn these amalgamations infinitely and very frequently. These amalgamations follow the archetype of creatures that we already have in the game, so there are brutes, there are shockers, acidic versions, just for a few examples. There are also low HP versions that are, I think they're called swarming amalgamations, and these creatures, all of them, are entirely too tough for things that are spawned infinitely out of thin air. But if I had one piece of meaningful feedback, it would be that the amalgamations are just generally way too tough for things that can be spawned out of thin air for free by this lieutenant just infinitely. Now, I was only able to test this briefly, but basically my encounters went like this. I'm out at night in the woods, the lieutenant spawns. The terrain around me gets deleted, so I have no cover and have to either move into the forest or try to fight the enemies. Multiple amalgamations appear out of thin air. I never even see this lieutenant. I then try to fight the amalgamations, either to find the lieutenant or escape into the forest, and I die every single time because there's too many of them and I can't kill them fast enough. Or I try to run away, but I'm in a forest and there's really nowhere for me to go, and there's a lot of difficult terrain, and then the terrain gets deleted around me and the amalgamations swarm me and my character dies. I never encountered this in a meaningful way. It literally just killed me every single time. In all of these circumstances, I had no idea which direction the lieutenant was in, so even if I could have found it, I had no meaningful way to kill it. So every single time I died horrifically in the woods, and the end. There was nothing unique or engaging about this encounter. It was literally just me being instantly swarmed by many amalgamations, and I died immediately. I really see nothing about this that is enjoyable. I rather dislike this so far, but let's not get into a ramble, I guess. So yeah, my overall take is that this seems pretty terrible in its current form. People on Discord have said that they've been able to kill the lieutenant by simply running at it with a flashlight and just beating it to death. The main person who reported this, however, had a strength of 20, I believe was related to hydraulic muscle, that CBM, and they said they were barely able to kill it before they ran out of stamina. Other people have suggested hitting it with a car using your headlights, of course, and this seems very plausible. If you're able to encounter it in, not in the forest, you maybe could do this. And Holly did indeed confirm that an M72 law does indeed kill it, so if you've got an anti-tank weapon laying around, there you go. Other people have suggested using bombs against it, but it has so much armor that bomb fragments probably wouldn't do anything, would be my guess there. And most importantly, all of these things hinge on you knowing where that creature spawned, being able to find it in the dark as it tries to stay out of flashlight range, and then you killing it before it spawns an enormous wall of amalgamations that block your ability to pursue it in the first place. So for personal feedback, I like the idea of the lieutenants quite a lot, but this is currently spawning very early in the game. For game testing purposes, they made it spawn earlier than it will, in the future. And unfortunately, I suspect this will kill many players who have no idea what is happening. And indeed, some people already popped on Reddit to gripe about this, and I really don't blame you. I would be very frustrated by this. People in Discord seem to dismiss my concerns and say it will not be difficult at all, but I think those people have either not encountered it organically or just have not tested this at all, and they're just talking without knowing what they're talking about. To me, this looks like it will actually ruin the game for quite a lot of newer players, or even not so new players. I think if this popped up in my current game, I would probably just die and that would be it, and I would be very annoyed. I think most players will just walk in the woods and find themselves suddenly surrounded by lots of amalgamations, and they'll die, and that'll be the end of their character. That just seems how this is going to go. I hate that it has 500 ballistic armor. I hate regen in general. Don't think it should be regenning 5% HP per turn. I don't like that. I hate that it has a dodge of 10, and I hate that it can infinitely spawn pretty powerful creatures just out of thin air. If it spawned only from corpses, or if it spawned them less frequently, or if the amalgamations were weaker, I think this would be a lot more tolerable. But anyway, that's a long enough discussion. Still probably 8 minutes of talking, so whatever. The point was to rewrite this to shorten it and make it a more manageable piece of recording. But there you go, internet. Those are my thoughts as of now. I think you're informed enough at this point. I don't have a solution for you. I guess try to hit it with a car or shoot it with a bazooka or whatever. There's always more that I could say here, but there you go. Anyway, that's the end of this video this time around. I have to immediately, unfortunately, begin the next one because this one was so late. Also, hopefully the day you're watching this is Tuesday the 15th, which is the day that I have my echocardiogram, which is the ultrasound of my heart. Now, I'm a lot less nervous about this than I was about the stress test last week, but yeah, we're going to see how this goes. Everyone, thank you for watching. I will be back eventually with another episode, so I'll see you next time.